section is, again, some of you might not be doing this right now, or you might never have to do it because your papers are more like long literature reviews. However, I still think it's useful to look over this because there's specific language that you should use to help ideas flow, and that can transfer into other areas of writing, not just in the methods section. So the main thing about methods is that there are 7, we've talked about moves before, moves in writing. Moves are things you can do in writing that have a specific purpose, right? So the moves in methods, these are the things that you should do in your methods section or methodology section, and that most people do in their in these sections, or if they don't have a specific methods section, they at least do it at some point in their paper before they talk about their results. They explain how or why they used, how they did the research and why they used that method. So overview of the summary of the research method, explanation of the research aims, questions, or hypotheses, description of those, subjects or materials, so a description of the people, the subjects are the people in the study, or the materials, the equipment in the study. The location, so an explanation of where the study was conducted, if that's necessary. The procedure, an explanation of the process. The language in the procedure section is typically different from the other sections. Typically, if you're talking about a process, you're using the active voice if it was a natural process, or the passive voice if it was a man-made process. So humans were conducting the process. It's usually passive. Limitations, the shortcomings of the method. Like, you need to explain that you know the limitations of that method, of using this equation or using this theory. So your method might be to use a theory in order to analyze a certain situation, and then you need to explain that you understand the limitations of using that theory. That way, if your readers are saying, well, you know, they didn't consider these things when they were doing their interpretation, so their interpretation must not be accurate. If you consider the limitations and yet you prove yourself right anyway, that can go further than forgetting to show that you understand the flaws or the limitations. And then the data analysis. So description of how. You're not actually going to analyze anything in the method section. You're going to describe how you're going to analyze. What are you going to use to analyze the data? Oops, too much. Okay. So there are 2 kinds of method sections. Some are extremely elaborate. Some are long. You know, they can be many pages. They can have many sections. In some methodology sections, that's where you're going to have the theory, the theoretical framework explained. You might have the specific, an entire defense or rationale for that method, so they have synthesis with other writers who have used the same method and explaining why that's so important to use in this specific situation. You know, you can go on and on with all the different things you can do in a method section and the ways people use it. So some people's method section actually is very short. It could be just 1 paragraph at the end of the introduction even. You know, you might not even have that section and it might go straight to the results. I would say that that paper, depending on the field, it might not be as appreciated, right? You want to see what other people's methods are. That way you can learn and you can contribute to your field and how people do research in your field. I know that every time that you look at research, you should always be wondering what method they were using. Because if they were using a method that you don't believe is appropriate for that research, then you might disregard their results. However, if they're using a method that you think is appropriate, then you can consider that. That's the problem with, you know, very generic newspapers talking about research, because they never talk about how those researchers did that. And so that's why it's so important to bring up this topic, even if it's very short. So the condensed one states what the researchers did with no elaboration. Just this is what we did, or the tense is going to depend on your field. You know, use the tense that you believe is most common based on the articles that you have. So either you did the research, or you are doing the research, or you do the research. It could be present, future, past. It really depends on the field. I've seen it all different ways. It also sometimes depends on the journal. So you want to look at different articles, example articles in that journal, and see what they expect of the tense in that condensed method section. Also, the condensed method section, whether or not it's short or long, might depend on the field as well, and it might depend on the journal. So look at the journals. Do they have a long methodology section in all of these articles? Then you need one too. Do they not even have a method section? There's just a little description of what they do, of how they did the research, then don't use a method section. Just use that short paragraph. Okay, but that's something I want you to know at the end of this lesson. I want you to know exactly what is common in your field. So you need to look that up now. It needs to be an active thing. So extended, so some of you might notice that your methodology sections in all of your articles are really long. And that means that you are expected to write extended or elaborated method sections. So how do you elaborate on the condensed one? So you might provide background knowledge, more background on your topic. Use descriptions of steps in the process. So you might actually explain the process in great detail. First, second, third. You might list the justifications or the rationale. As I explained, some authors even there's a long section discussing the rationale by using other people's articles, right? So you might look at what other people have done and explain why you are doing what you're doing. Okay, and then you might make statements that are like, this was done by reversing the order. So explaining how something was conducted. So this was done by doing the following. So instead of just saying, we put the water into the machine. And then when the water came out the first pump, it went into the second pump. So when you have that kind of process, you're not giving extreme detail as to how you put the water in the machine, how the water went from one pump to the next pump. You can elaborate by talking about that. You're almost like showing your reader without giving them pictures of it, but you can also give them images. Using linking words and phrases. That's important. All right, so I want you to think about these 3 questions. Are the method sections condensed, intermediate, like are they kind of in the middle of condensed and long, or are they extended? What is the tense used? What is the voice? Is it past tense, present perfect? Is it active or passive? And there might be both. There might be all of the above, but you have to think about why. Are they using present tense when they're talking about what is in their own paper? Are they using future? They might say, we will discuss this. Are they using past when they're talking about other people's research that was conducted in the past? Are they using the active voice when they're talking about what they did in their research, and then passive when they're talking about the process? So you want to think about the different when they're using these tenses and then and voices, and then why you think that they're using those voices, and that will help you learn more. I can't list all of the fields and explain how all of the fields do this. It's very different depending on the field and also the article, but I can help you when you do your writing. I can help you see if it makes any sense the way that you did it. And what are the section headings used in the papers in your field? So I'm going to show you some examples. Okay. I want to show you examples of actual papers, and I'll go into detail. Right. So results, methodology. So this person has, in psychology, an entire section on methodology. They explain the theoretical framework. They have these headings. They explain the empirical strategy. Okay. And then that goes to the results, so is the next section. So they have two parts of their methodology. So they explain what theory they are using, and they use some synthesis. They're talking about other authors who have done the same. And say, as outlined in Yamano ... in a general utility framework defined over consumption, child nutrition, and cognitive development, including preference shifters, parents are assumed to ... So they're explaining what the theory basis is for their research, and then why they use that, and then how they use that theory, right? So what theory? Why are they using that theory? And how? We talked about the theory section, but this is a good example. I'll put this as an example. I know it's going to be different in your field, but I'm just going to add this in here so that you have it. As an example. Okay. So it's there. And then here's another article that has a method section, but this one is very explicit. So you see this one, it does have sections, but it does everything that we want. If you read through it, it does everything that we want, but a little less explicitly. The sections aren't by purpose, so it explains all the things. It has an overview of what it's discussing, why it's talking about it, why they use the theory, why what the empirical data explains, etc. How they're going to analyze this data. They explain all of that stuff, but not as explicitly. Here, this author has participants, very clearly stated, not in paragraph form, but in bullet point form, in a list. Task and apparatus, procedure, right? So they chose the three things that were most important for their methods section, and then they put them in here very, very clearly. This might not be the way that you need to do it, because in your field, it might look different. You need to base it on what is common in your field and what is expected in the journal. So look at the #1 journal in your field and see how they do it. We can see here that there are different tenses used. The experiment was performed on a regular badminton court. So they're talking about the actual experiment being conducted in the past tense. Right? They're talking about, here they're using the passive voice when they're talking about the procedure. In the first test phase, pressure was induced. They don't talk about a person inducing pressure. Pressure was induced because the person is not important. Participants were randomly arranged into 2 groups. Here it's back to active. We told them that the team with more precise serves wins. So here it's back to active because they're important. The researchers are important here. The researchers are important here. Back to passive. The researchers are not important. The teams were encouraged. Back to passive. A video camera was set up. People are not important there. The researchers are important here, so it's back to active. Okay, so you can see that passive and active really, when you have a procedure and you're describing something and the researchers aren't important, you're not going to use the active voice. You're not going to mention yourself. But when it is important to mention the researchers, there's no way to say, you don't really, maybe they didn't want to say that they were told to do something. It doesn't make sense to really say the participants were told to do this. So they are using the active to say we told them, right? Because maybe it matters that the researchers told the participants this and not somebody else. So that's why it's active voice there. Okay, and then let's go back to this example. Here, the person's using the present tense because they're talking about the objective of the paper. Remember, one of the criteria for a methods section is to talk about the research aims, questions, or hypotheses. Here, it says it. The main objective is to investigate if observed economic and non-academic shocks that occurred early in 2002 and those that occurred between 2006 and 2009 have an effect on cognitive achievement. So here, the objective of the paper is, because the paper exists today, so it is, the purpose of this research is, right? These events happened in the past, so they're using the past tense, occurred, observed. And then they use the present tense again, have, because oftentimes the thing that you're trying to prove is something that already happens. You're trying to prove that it already happens, right? Have an effect on cognitive achievement. So it's not that it will have an effect because it's already happening now, right? A lot of research in science is explaining or trying to prove that something is already happening. So in that case, you're going to use the simple present tense. Okay. There are two ways through which this mechanism can work. There are two ways in which this mechanism can work. First, drought shocks can affect, right? So they're using the present tense through all of this, and they're using modals, can. All right. Again, present tense. So I want you to look at your paper, at your articles, and see what the tense is for the method sections in your articles. I also want you to look at your articles and see what linking phrases they use. Okay, so linking phrases are really crucial for method sections because they can be very dry. It can be hard to follow, so you really want to lead your reader through this as easily as possible. You don't want them to have to do any work. You're doing the work for them. You want to communicate it as clearly as possible using these. Academic language does not mean difficult, right? It actually is the easiest language. It should be the easiest language for your reader to understand. So, because it isn't like fiction writing. It isn't like literature. You're not trying to make your reader work. You're trying to explain it as simply as possible so that they can go and use what you learned in their own work. Okay, so using these is crucial. You don't want to make it dry, you want to make it easy. So purpose statements, topic sentences are really important. So these are the first sentences in each paragraph that really explains what the paragraph is going to be about, how it connects to the paragraph before it, and how it connects to the overall idea of the method section. So these might be examples of the ways in which to start a paragraph. To detect groups among specimens, we used ... To avoid weighting characters, we excluded. To account for these limitations, we decided, right? So we can assume that groups among specimens was explained or talked about in the paragraph before, and we're leading from that paragraph to the next one. Weighting characters must have been mentioned as a limitation in the last paragraph, and then in the new paragraph you're talking about how you avoid it. These limitations must have been described in the last paragraph, and then now you're talking about how to account for them in an effort to evaluate. So in an effort to evaluate the limitations, we ... In order to establish this new theory, ... To further test this hypothesis, again, all of these have these key words, like this hypothesis. These are key words that lead you from one paragraph to the next paragraph. And that's a really important way to start a paragraph. So I'm going to show you this example. Okay, so this one is talking about estimation, and then here we have a key concern in estimating equation using OLS is the potential and endogeneity, largely due to unobserved child-parent ... So, and then they use the word moreover. They use a lot of connection phrases in this. One instance. Okay, the main objective is, right? So that kind of sets off the tone of what that paragraph is going to be about. In this section, we outline ... They explain explicitly what they're going to talk about. Right? A large literature studying early childhood development examines ... So it's a very general phrase, and they're going to go into more specific. This is kind of a synthesis literature review discussing the theoretical framework. Every single paragraph here starts with a connection phrase or